Yo, hold up, man. I got something to say, man. Yo, wait. What y'all out here for? What you here for, huh? Y'all living free? I mean, truly free. Because that's God's plan. That's the plan, y'all. Our God doesn't do slavery. He does freedom. And it's time for us to learn how to do free. Because the old way, that ain't for us, bro. That ain't for us. That ain't our call.
When I was little, Darth Vader lived in my closet. Don't know why you're laughing, it was terrifying. Fact, if my father had not shut my closet door every night, I would be standing in front of you here today, dead. Fact, monsters lived under my bed. At night only at nighttime. And when I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I had to jump out so that they did not grab my ankles with their taloned hands and drag me under the bed. To my certain demise, the next morning, my parents would only find a blood-stained pair of Superman pajamas. That would be it. That's dark. Okay. So what's going on in my head? Fact. The scariest movie I had ever seen all the way through high school was a movie called Alien. I hate it. Do not talk about it with me. Do not post anything to my account with images. I will unfollow you. It's terrifying. I hate it. It was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. So my senior year in high school, the choir I was a part of got invited to go to this competition in Florida, so we went to Universal Studios. And we're there as a whole group. All of us are there. We're having fun. And we go to Universal Studios, and they have this ride. It's like a scary ride, and everyone's there. And there's this girl. Her name is Layla. And I was like, hey, I was trying to finagle it the whole day to like sit with Layla on like a ride or something. And wouldn't you know it, on this ride, it's like, oh, there's only 2 people left. Oh, funny how I paid all those people to pair up. Anyway. So I'm sitting with Layla, and we're going, and it's like a T-Rex. I'm like, oh. And then there's Jaws, Jaws. And then there's like, King Kong, oh, King Kong. And then it gets dark, and there's mist, and we're in a space locker. What's going on? Is this Godzilla? And then all of a sudden, we're in the 4th car, 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of a sudden, from right here, right where I am, the alien just comes out. I scream like a girl at a Taylor Swift concert. I stand up and I break the lap bar restraining band. I strip the gears, climb over Layla. The ride stops, the lights come on, this voice comes over the intercom. Please get back in your seats. I'm like, I will sit down when that thing is gone. Put that xenomorph back! In space, no one can hear you scream. But in Universal Studios, everyone heard me scream. So, all of these experiences made me believe to my core that evil, if it were ever to present itself to me, would actually find its way into my life in a way that would be utterly terrifying, in a way that I would be able to see and identify and recognize. I'd be so revolted and terrified, I would run away. That's what I thought evil was like. But as it turns out, as the Bible instructs us, evil does not look that way. Evil does not appear as a winged 6-foot demon. Evil often appears in a way that is incredibly seductive. In fact, throughout the Bible, there's ways of describing evil that are really interesting. Peter says that it's like a roaring lion. In Genesis, early on, with the story of Cain and Abel, God comes and says that evil, that sin's like a crouched animal, like a crouched tiger waiting to devour you. Animals, like big cats, hunt by stealth. And when they hunt best, you don't even see them coming. This, biblically, is what evil is like. And sometimes evil is so insidious, we don't even see it coming until it's too late. Jesus comes to warn us of this. He tries to help us see realities that we can't see, to look in the tall grass and see the movement of the big cats of evil and sin and death. And there's a story in Matthew 19 that should make us all shudder, because Jesus tries to point this out. He tries to show and illuminate. Don't you see? Death is coming for you. Sin is coming for you. Evil is coming for you. And this man, he doesn't see it. In fact, he turns, and he's so blinded, he turns and walks right away from Jesus, right toward death. It should make us shudder. It's there in Matthew 19. It's the story of the rich young ruler. You might have heard of it. What happens in this story, it's told in two Gospels, because this encounter with this rich young ruler was so exceptional that two of the Gospel writers put it in. Matthew, the tax collector, and Peter, who put it in his Gospel, which was scribed by John Mark. Mark and Matthew both have it. Now, in this story, what happens is there's this guy, and he's rich, and he's successful. He's got power and money. He's very, very impressive in the ancient world. A modern-day Elon Musk, if you will, and I will. And in the middle of this, he comes up to Jesus, and he says this incredible thing. Now, this guy's so put together. He's so put together, he knows he doesn't have it all together. That's how together he is, right? And he says, "Good teacher, what do I have to do to get right with God? To have eternal life, this thing that you're talking about?" Because this man realized that Jesus spoke in a way that was completely unlike. He spoke with an authority that was completely unlike anything he had seen in the business or civic world. And he says, "I want what you have." I'm not, maybe he felt like he wasn't right with God. You ever felt that way? You ever felt not right with God? My wife said before she met Jesus, she didn't feel right in her own skin. You ever feel that way? There's a desire, a hunger, a missing piece. Of course you feel that way. You're in church. But the point is, you know what I'm talking about, right? And this man comes to Jesus and says, what do I do? Now, Jesus is about to explode this guy's categories. Now, what this guy doesn't know is that life with Jesus is not something you add to your life. It's not like salt. You don't like add it to your meal, right? Just in the same way that Frodo did not add the Lord of the Rings trilogy to his life. It just overtakes him. It's a thing, and it defines you. That's what it is. It's like getting struck by lightning. It's not, you know? And it's not something you do. It's something you become. It's much bigger than that. But this guy doesn't know that, and so he encounters Jesus, and he says, "Hey, what do I have to do?" And Jesus' answer is really interesting. He says, you got to keep the commandments. Keep the 10 commandments. Keep the commandments. You know the commandments. We've been talking about this as a community for the last 9 weeks. We've gone through all of them. The 10 commandments were given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai as an articulation of who the character of God is, and also what kind of people he wanted to form, what he wanted to have in his people. They were an articulation, a beautiful revelation of who God is and what he wants. This is a beautiful thing. And we've been studying these. And he says, you got to keep the commandments. And so this man, this rich young ruler, says, I kept them since I was a boy. I kept them since I was little. And Jesus, with that response, knows something's up. And so he turns and pivots and challenges. Now, this is very important. In the story account in Matthew, it doesn't say this, but Peter includes it in his gospel. He says that Jesus looked at this rich young ruler and loved him. That's important. That's important. Because what it means is what Jesus is about to say, although it is harsh, although it is like a 2x4 to the face, Jesus does it because of love. Which means that sometimes hard, harsh, challenging words from Jesus are actually said in love. When Jesus yells, watch out, it's not because he's mean in his tone. It's because he wants you to watch out because death is coming. And so he says something to him, this man, this rich young ruler. This is what he says. And he says, he basically devises a trap. He says, I'm going to have a test for you. And Jesus launches a test. And this man fails miserably. And Jesus knows he's going to fail. And so at the end of it, he even says, even if you fail this test, there's still a way out. I'll help you. This is what Jesus says. And it's astonishing. He says, the young man said to him, all these I have kept. These are the commandments. What do I still lack? And Jesus said to him, if you want to be perfect, go right with God. If you want this life that I'm talking about, go sell what you possess, give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, and then come follow me. And when the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful. One translation says grieved. It's not just sad, it's deep sadness, for he had great possessions. What Jesus is saying is this man was being stalked by a predator he didn't even understand, and it was dangerous. And it caused this man, it was so dangerous, it caused this man to turn and walk away from Jesus. Now, what is this enemy? So for our time together, I'm going to talk about three things. First, what is this enemy? 2, why this enemy is so dangerous. And 3, of course, with Jesus' help and instruction, how we can avoid it. So what is this enemy? The enemy that Jesus is talking about, I believe firmly in this story, is the 10th commandment. Jesus is saying, you think that you have kept all the commandments, but there's one that you have not. There's one that you can't. It's the 10th commandment. Now, for those of you who do not have these tattooed on your arms, let me reveal. That was funny, huh? Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mom. The 10th commandment is this. You might have seen it. Commandment 10, it's in Exodus. It says, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant. There's a pool boy joke in there somewhere. I just can't find it. His ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So it's pretty clear, right? Don't covet. Now, okay, so let's talk about this, because I believe that Jesus is firmly talking about this word covet. But in order to understand that, we can't just blow by it. We have to study. We have to look at this, okay? Because this word covet is so dangerous that it's like a silent killer. And it's so dangerous, it apparently can actually cause us to turn and actively walk away from Jesus. So we got to be careful with this one. So what does the word covet mean? The word covet is the Hebrew word hamad. Now this word means to see and to strongly desire, and there's a layer over it. It means to see and strongly desire something that's not yours, right? That's not yours. So now this word, hamad, first appeared in the Hebrew scriptures very, very early in the story. It appears on page 3 with the talking snake, where the talking snake comes to the humans and says, hello, God is holding out on you. You think you've got the Eden, you think you've got a perfect garden, you think everything is great, but God's holding out on you. In fact, there's this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he doesn't want you to eat it, because if you eat it, you'll become like him. And this is where this word first appears. When the woman Hamad saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also this word Hamad for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. So this word covet appears very early, very, very early, and has destructive consequences. This is the first time that humans see and grab and take. Because sometimes what we see and what we want, if we grab it, it can be death, can't it? Even if we don't know it. Sometimes we're so deceived we can't even see it. So this is where this word first appears. So very important word. Would you agree? This word covet, this word hamad. But it goes on, and this word is important. So what does the word covet mean? The word covet's weird, right? We don't use the word covet anymore. It's not like you walk in the office, and you'd be like, Jim, I covet thy cinnamon raisin bagel. No, Dwight, repent thee, lest thee burn. Oh, Panera, why doth thou vex me so? I don't know where I went there. That was fun though. So we don't use the word covet, but there's another word that this word gets translated into a lot in the Old and the New Testament. It's kind of a synonym, if you will, and that's this. The word covet's the same as greed. Now we know greed, we know what that means. But here's the problem with the word greed, right? Remember, all the way back in the 80s, Gordon Gekko, Wall Street, greed is good, right? This is what we built our modern economy on. Greed, right? Get as much as you can and charge as much as you can, and greed. It's bad, right? But the Bible says that this word is bad, right? That this thing, greed, is terrible. In fact, this thing, greed, is insidious. In fact, this thing, greed, can actually cause you to actively walk away from Jesus. You got to beware. This is really, really dangerous stuff. This word greed. Now, the thing about greed that's interesting, and the word about covet that's interesting, this 10th commandment is interesting because greed is not an external action like the other 10 commandments. Does that make sense? So you murder somebody, that's an action, right? You steal, that's an action. You build a calf out of gold, that's an action. You dishonor your mom and dad, it's an action. You lie in a court of law and bear false witness, that's an action. You commit adultery, that's an act. Do you see what I'm saying? These are all actions. But covet or greed is not an action, is it? No, it's an internal disposition. It has to do with your heart. Now, as each of the speakers over the last 9 weeks have shown, Jesus is after the renovation of the heart, and he shows, for example, so many times that really what God's after is our heart. But this commandment is different. It is an external action. It's not an external action. It's an internal disposition. In fact, there's only one other commandment that really is kind of like this, and that's the first one, which means that kind of the first and the 10th commandments are linked, like a song, like a poem, like a rhythm. The first commandment, you should have no other gods before me. And this is kind of the Shema, the Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This has to do with an internal position of your heart toward God. And Steve made a very compelling case that all of the commandments lie on these, and it's very true. But 10 echoes back, doesn't it? It's an internal disposition, not an external action. Just like 1 has to do with your heart. So there's like a chorus, verse, chorus. There's a refrain, a repeat, a calling back to that first commandment. This is interesting. So covet or greed is different than the other commandments because it's not an action, it's an internal disposition. But it goes even further. It goes even further than that. And that's that it's kind of, this word covet, this word greed, is weirdly invisible to us. Now, in order to describe just how bad coveting is, we have to look at Jesus' words. But in order to do that, I have to go back and reference an album cover that Rolling Stone said was the most famous rock and roll album cover art in the history of rock and roll. Now, some of you are sitting out there and you're like, what is an album cover? And I would say to you, it's like a CD cover. And some of you are sitting out there and you're saying, what is a CD? And to you, I say, shut up. So I'm going to show you what Rolling Stone said are the most famous album covers in the history of album covers. Here they are. Here's the first one. Remember this one? Anybody know this? Abbey Road, right? Why does Paul not have shoes on? No one knows. Paul, put some shoes on before you step on something. All right, and then this one. Anybody know this one? This is a famous album cover. Anybody? Springsteen, the Boss, right? Yeah, there it is. Born in the USA. And this one, yeah, somebody in the, I was like, yeah, ready to die. Biggie? No? All right. And then one of the most famous ones, actually, and in recent, anybody remember this one? Oh man, this thing redefined music, right? Nirvana. They actually found this kid, and some of you are like, I don't think it's appropriate. He put nudity up on the screen in church. There's a baby penis up there. I don't think that's right. I'm going to get letters. Just don't think it's right. So they actually found this kid, and they restaged this photo with him currently, like a couple of months ago. This is him now. I am old. I hate it. No, but this is the most famous album cover of all time. Anybody know? Anybody familiar with this? Classic rock guys, right? Pink Floyd, right? Anybody who really loves Pink Floyd makes me a little nervous. Like, man, I love Pink Floyd. It's like, you probably did drugs, right? Okay, but this is one of my favorite album covers of all time because I think it says something really beautiful and true about the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible. I think it's fabulously beautiful. Now, let me try to explain. You see that big white light that's coming into the prism? That represents the Old Testament. The spoken word of God, right? The light from the eternal Son, right? The light that comes from God himself, the revelation, all of his Old Testament words, his character, his actions, the words from his prophets, what God did, and that's what it is. And then that prism in the middle, that represents Jesus. And what Jesus does is he takes that light and he refracts it Sometimes he intensifies certain teachings. Sometimes he dissipates certain teachings. Sometimes he strengthens them and clarifies them, reimagines them, and articulates the heart behind it. Now, there are some people that say we don't need the Old Testament, right? But in order for there to be a refraction, you gotta have it. It's super important. And other people say, well, now that we have that rainbow, it's up to us to newly refract this new light. And so we get to interpret Jesus' words in our modern. And to which I would say, you're not Jesus. There's no other prism ever. But, so this is kind of what it looks like, right? The Old Testament goes in, this is Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, he clarifies, and then his New Testament stories and teachings kind of clarify. For example, and we've gone through this, the Old Testament says don't commit adultery. It goes through Jesus and he says, you have heard it said, but I say to you. He's clarifying. He's clarifying. And he says, it's not just adultery, the act, it's about your heart. Don't have lust in your heart, right? So another one, we've talked about this. You've heard it said, don't murder. It goes through Jesus. Jesus says, yes, 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 but I say to you, I'm going to clarify here, don't even have contempt for your brother, because that's actually even bad. Now, here's the thing that's weird about this. In the Old Testament, there's this idea, this concept that's giant throughout the entire Old Testament. In fact, you could say it's one of the major themes. It's this word idolatry. Now, we don't use the word idolatry very much. Very few people actually sacrifice an offering to a god in the morning in the United States, right? We don't use the word idolatry. In fact, Jesus actually doesn't speak about idolatry a whole bunch, but he does talk about idolatry a whole bunch because in the New Testament, he talks about money a lot. Because the primary idol that people start using, now here's what an idol is. For centuries, humans have been scared of the world. It's unpredictable and scary. So what do we try to do? Control. And what do we try to do to control? We try to do whatever it takes to make sure whatever power is bigger than us, and we have this vague sense that maybe there's a power that's bigger, is appeased. And so that's what an idol is. You do whatever the idol says. And this is what money has become. Money is the primary idol for most humans in the modern world. Because it's the way that we solve problems. It's what our hearts desire the most. Now, see, the thing about idol is not just an action, it's an inward thing. It's what your heart most needs. And so for Jesus, money represents a dangerous spiritual threat. Now, you say, well, Dave, don't you mean greed for money? And to which I would say, you're parsing words. I would say, maybe, but maybe it's just money. Remember what Jesus says. He says this. He says, be careful. He says, you can't serve both God and money. You're going to hate one and love the other. Now, here's why money and love of money, here's why money is such a dangerous idol. Here's why it is. So in this weird way, coveting and possessions and money go together with greed, and this is a dangerous spiritual threat to us that can pull us away from God. Here's why money is so dangerous. First of all, if you have money, it can ruin you. And if you don't have money, it can ruin you. It can do both. So everybody is in trouble. So here's what can happen if you have money. First of all, you'll be arrogant. There's this underlying idea in almost every culture at all time that rich people are actually better people and that God somehow has shined on them. And so you'll be arrogant and you'll look down on people who don't have money. This is what money can do. It can corrupt you. The second thing is being prideful, because money allows you to solve all sorts of problems, right? And so if you have enough power to solve a lot of problems, for example, if you have a health problem, you got a lot of money, you can solve a lot of health problems. If you've got a housing problem with money, you can solve those problems. You can solve a lot of problems with money, can't you? And so you start to think that you're powerful, maybe even all powerful. But then there's, of course, some problems that you can't solve with money, but we're not going to get to that. But even more than that, you begin thinking that you're really good. And so you, in the words of Yogi Berra, you go through life on third base thinking you've hit a triple. But it gets worse. You can become self-reliant. You can begin to think that you don't need anybody or anything because money can solve all your problems. And even worse than that, you can start to have control issues because you can control so much with money, and you'll start to take money and grab it so that you don't ever have to go without. And then the other thing that money can do is cause an insatiable lust for more. Now here's the weird thing. There's no end point with the word more, is there? And the question is, how much is enough? And the answer is more. And do you see how that can ruin a human being? This is dangerous stuff. And of course, without it, if you don't have money, it's also deadly. It can lead to incredible jealousy of other people. You start to look at other people in their lives and you wonder, well, why did God give them money? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? Well, I don't get it. And you can begin to be angry at God. You can be murderously envious and you want to take what they have and begin to hate people. You can also have bitterness, both toward your fellow person and toward God himself for not giving you what you think you deserve. And so it can have this weird entitlement. The other thing it can do is it can make you worry and be filled with anxiety about money. And you start to overwork yourself to try to grab money because if only you had money, then you could make things okay. And it becomes a god. It becomes the primary thing you're going after. So money is dangerous with money or without. This is an insidious and subtle enemy. And Jesus, he says a couple of things about this. No one can serve two masters. He'll either hate the one. And then he also says this one. Do you remember this one? I love this in Luke 12. He says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Jesus says, look out for greed and coveting. Look out for what money can do in the human heart, right? Because again, money's not evil, but it can be like the ring. It can corrupt you. It can corrupt you. That's the second Lord of the Rings reference. We got to cut that. Okay. But you know what I mean, right? It can corrupt you. It can begin to corrupt you. Jesus says, watch out. Now, this is curious. Why does Jesus say, watch out? He doesn't say, watch out that you don't accidentally commit adultery. Watch out that you don't accidentally kill somebody. Watch out that you don't bear false witness in a court of law. You don't need to watch out for those things. Why? Because they are deliberate, right? But what is it about greed? Jesus says, watch out, meaning you are blind to it. Tim Keller, the pastor, he said something on a podcast once about money, and it never has left me. And I've been a pastor for a little bit of time. He's been much longer. He says, I've never had somebody come into my office and say, I've got a greed problem. I've had people come in, and I was like, wow, I never have either. I've had people come in for adultery, for sex, for lust, for issues of anger. I've had people come in for almost everything, all the other commandments, right? I'm overworked, I'm overstressed. I know that I haven't put God first in my life. I can't get along with my spouse, my parents, my friends. I'm a jerk at work. I don't understand every issue under the sun. I've never had anybody come in and say, you know, I think I keep too much of my own money. I think I'm not stewarding my money well. I've never had somebody come in under greed. It's invisible to us. That's why Jesus says, watch out. It's a lion, it's a tiger stalking us. And if we're not careful, it can get in and it can actually cause us to deliberately walk away from Jesus. Greed really is the idolatry of money. That's what coveting is. In our modern society, it's coveting money, believing that money is the most important thing. And what's an idol? An idol is if I have it, then my life has meaning. Then I'll know I have value. Then I'll have significance. Then I'll be secure. That's what an idol is. Anything like that. So, this is a weird, nuanced, deadly enemy. And Jesus is trying to warn us against it. So I started thinking, and this is weird. Well, I don't have a greed problem. That's what I said to myself. That's literally what I said to myself. After reading all this, I don't have a greed problem. I'm an idiot. So how can we do a diagnostic? How can we watch out for this stalking predator that threatens to kill us? Is there a test? I started thinking, I think coveting, of course it is about money. And some of you might be convicted right now. God's Spirit, when Jesus says, watch out, you might be saying, oh man, I really need to do some hard work with God on that. But I started thinking about this. I think coveting is even bigger than this, because if it really is an idle heart issue, if it's really about what you put your trust in, then it's even bigger than money, isn't it? It's even bigger. It's anything. Now, money's primarily the thing for a lot of people, but it could be anything. It could be bigger than this. So I started thinking, how in the world how do I covet, and how do I know? So, read all the spiritual directors I could about coveting, about what it means to have greed, about what it means, why this is so dangerously insidious spiritually. And I want to expand the definition of coveting a little bit beyond money. This is something that might help. Maybe this will help, maybe this won't. This is me trying to help and trying to get to the point where I let God try to figure out what's going on in me. Maybe this is helpful, maybe it's not. But here it is. I realized that when I say the following things, I'm coveting. First, when I say to God, I wish you had made me different, what I start to do is I'm starting to covet. When I look at other people and I'm angry at God because he did not make me with their gifts or talents, I'm coveting. This is a form of greed and dissatisfaction, and it can lead me into a dangerous path. You know, I look at this is the danger of working in a place like Westgate, where we have so many wildly talented people. I look around and I'm like, why can't I sing, have the artistry of Karina Gerard? Why can't I be cool and write music like Josh Fox? Why can't I have the leadership, panache, and the gut instincts of Steve? I mean, watching him is incredible. God, why didn't you give me these gifts? Why did you have to just make me incredibly sexy? Why, God? Why are you laughing? That's mean. When you start to compare yourself to other people, what you have, what you don't have, you're in dangerous territory, aren't you? Because you become dissatisfied with how God has made you. And there's been times when I've said out loud to mentors and to friends and to God himself, why did you make me this way? You made me wrong. You know, this is not fair. This is dangerous. This is a form of coveting. Now, I was a youth pastor for years. I'm going to tell you 2 places I saw this, and maybe this will resonate, maybe not. I saw this a ton, and this was shocking to me. I saw this a ton with young women. Young women would just look at other women and just begin to compare physically what they had, what they didn't have. They would begin to make checklists about how they're better than this person or worse than this person, and they would be unbelievably envious and covetous of the way that God had made other women. There was so much comparison. Now this could be, I don't know why this is. Is it the supermarket checkout stands where the standard is put up and airbrushed for everyone to see? But I saw this over and over and over again with the young women that we would work with. And this was staggering to me because there's these young women who are objectively gorgeous, beautifully made by God. And they're dissatisfied. And they look in the mirror and they see their imperfections, not what God has made, not their beauty. This is staggering. And I thought, this is nuts. And then I had a daughter. And when she was 4 years old, she looked in the mirror and she said, I'm ugly. And I am telling you, we have never said that to her, ever. Where did that lie come from? And it is my job as her father to beat that lie out of her brain, right? To tell her the truth 1 billion times a day that she might never believe that insidious lie that snuck in that she is not made in the image of God, knitted together in her mother's womb for the glory of God. That's my job. Another group that I saw again and again and again were students from traditional families and from traditional cultures. Folks who are first or second generation Americans, they would tell me that when they walk into a room, the pressure to be something was so high and they knew they could never, ever live up to it. And I would ask them, where did this standard come from? Where did this standard come from? And they would say, I don't know, but it's there. And I can't live up to it. Maybe it's my older brother is this, and I'm never going to live up to that. Or my dad has this idea about what it looks like for me to be a successful son or a daughter, and I can never live up to it. And this pressure, and it comes down to, I know that God made me wrong, because if he made me right, I'd be able to do it and I'd be able to succeed. And I'm afraid and I'm terrified that I can, and I'm never going to live up to it. And so it becomes this treadmill of this ideal that they can never reach. And this is tough to hear. Tough to hear. God, I wish you made me different. If that's ever entered into your head, this is the beginnings of coveting. And you know what it leads to? Dissatisfaction. It leads to trying to be a pretender, something you're not. Another one. God, what you've given me isn't enough. Now, sometimes this can be material possessions, but for me, most of the time, it has to do with opportunities and success and job. God, the opportunities you've given me aren't enough. God, what I have, what you've given me, isn't enough. I look at other people and their successes. I look at other people and their abilities, other people and what they get to do, and I'm just jealous. It's just straight jealousy. And so I say, God, it's been unfair what you've given me. It's unfair. You've been holding back, you bless them, but you don't bless me, and then this jealousy comes. It's just bad. So when you say to God, what you've given me isn't enough, whether it's that neighbor's car or house, or whether it's that neighbor's job, promotion, or opportunity, when you say to God, what you've given me isn't enough, it can get really bad. I've seen this also in couples who are struggling to have a family. The sense of when we have a family, then we'll be whole. Whenever you say to God, if I had this, then I could be happy, I think we're in dangerous territory. Not that those things are wrong to desire or pray for, but it's just a dangerous thing to say to God, I need this to be happy, which brings me to the third one. Often when I say to God, you aren't enough. Whenever I say, I need this to be happy, basically what I'm saying is, God, you plus something is what I need. This is not the teachings of Jesus. I don't think this is the life he's offering. He doesn't say, come follow me and you'll get me plus a whole bunch of cool stuff. I mean, he does. That's what we get with Jesus, but it's not like Jesus plus something equals everything. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And everything minus Jesus equals nothing. And there's times I just don't believe that. I just don't believe it because I'm stiff-necked and foolish. So whenever you say to Jesus, if I had this, then I would be happy, I think we're in dangerous territory. So what do you do? What can we do? This is what I do. Again, this mileage may vary. This may be helpful. We're going to have the band come up, and I'm just going to examine 3 prayers that I pray. And I pray these frequently because I am prone to be fooled. I'm prone to greed. I'm prone to coveting. I'm prone to be deceived. I think Jesus wants to wake me up. And so when he says, be careful and watch out, when he says to the rich young ruler, hey, you better watch out, this is what I do. And I'm taking my inspiration from the story in John 21. Do you know the story? It's at the very end of John. There's this moment where Jesus and Peter are sharing this meal. And Peter has failed Jesus monstrously by denying him 3 times. And Jesus calls him onto this beach and says, do you love me? And he has him say it 3 times because -3 plus +3 equals a fresh start. And at the final time, Peter says, yes, Jesus, you know that I love you. And Jesus turns his attention and says something magnificent to Peter. He says, I know you do. I know you do. In fact, here's what I need you to know, Peter. When you were little, you dressed yourself. But there's going to come a day when some people are going to dress you in clothes you don't want to wear. When you were little, you could walk around wherever you wanted, but someday they're going to lead you up a hill, just like they led me up a hill, and you're not going to want to go there. Jesus is looking at Peter and saying, you're going to die a horrific death like I did. And I'll be with you, but that's what you're going to do. You know what Peter says the very next sentence? He sees John, his friend over there, and he says, well, what about him? Do you see what we do immediately? We compare. And Jesus rebukes him and says, not your letter to open, Peter. Follow me, he says, and he says it twice. Follow me. What is it to you? Don't compare. Don't compare what I'm doing in somebody else's life. You have no business. You have no idea what I'm doing in their life. You have no idea what I'm doing. You concentrate on what I'm doing in your life. Follow me. Me, Peter. Follow me. And that's his invitation to all of us. Don't compare. Don't look at other people and think you know what's going on in the interior of their heart, what God is or is not doing in their life. You have no idea. It's not our mail to open. Our only mail to open is the one that Jesus has sent us himself. That's the invitation. And so in the middle of this, these prayers, God, how you made me is enough. I don't need to be a pretender. I don't need to pretend that I'm somebody else. There's no good in being a pretender. I will be the person you have made me to be. And I will do it unapologetically, and I will be the best me that I can be. Peter says in one of his letters, we are living stones, not bricks, stones. And stones will come in all shapes and sizes, and they get put together on a wall by a master mason. And grace holds us together. How you made me is enough. Number 2, I say to God in this prayer, what you've given me is enough. I will faithfully harvest and toil the soil of the plot of land that you have given to me. I will be faithful for what is in front of me, what you have given to me. I will not look back or ahead and bemoan the doors that did or did not open. I will go through the open doors, and I will be faithful to what you have given me. What you've given me is enough. And third, you and me, God, it's enough. I don't lack anything if I have Jesus. Impossible to believe, perhaps, but with God all things are possible. There's a good chance that one of these prayers resonates with you. We're going to put them up. The band's just going to sit here and we're going to pray and we're going to have a little time with God, because perhaps one of these has revealed to you that coveting and idolatry have entered into your life. And if we do not deal with it with Jesus, if we do not invite him into that, if we do the thing that the rich young ruler did and turn and walk away, we're lost. So let's not do that, because Jesus is trying to say something to each of us. He's trying to invite us into this, to save us from the falseness of these lies and into the truth of what he's offering. Will you pray with me? Jesus, would you do a work for the person who feels that you've somehow made a mistake when you made them? Would you combat that lie with truth that only your Holy Spirit can whisper? You don't make mistakes. For the person who's dissatisfied, would you help us see that what you've given us is enough? May we trust your goodness and sovereignty. And lastly, could we somehow believe that you plus nothing equals everything? And may our relationship with you be our primary love. May our hearts be oriented completely toward you. It's in your name we pray, Jesus.